I live next to a daycare. It's one of those rare ones that are adapted to all kinds of working parents and are open 24 hours every day. It's actually quite a popular daycare, and sounds of children can always be heard. There are sounds of laughter, chatter, shouts, cries, all throughout both day and night. Then, there are times when you can't hear any child. I hate it when the children are silent. The first time the sound of children died down, I didn't think much of it. It was a nice break for the ears. I could finally have a proper rest. Then, when it had gone on for a while, I began to wonder why there weren't any noise. Had the daycare closed down? Or did they have some new extended, mandatory for everyone nap time? I looked out of my window at the daycare below, and I was not ready for the sight before me. There, on the yard around the daycare's building, were all the children. They were standing completely still and stared at something up in the sky. Confused by this eerie view, I too looked up to see what could possibly have such a reaction on the children. There was nothing. It was a regular, starless night, one I had seen many times in my life. I suppose it could be something new for the children, but not something that would make them be still and quiet for that long. Still, I didn't think about it too much at the time, and chalked it up to them playing some kind of game where the first one who moves loses. About half an hour later, the sound of children roaming around returned, and that was it. 2 months later, when I had begun to forget about that earlier incident with the silence, it returned. This time, it was the middle of the day. Again, it took me a while to notice, and when I did, I remembered the first time how creepy the children looking at the sky had been. As the first time, I chalked up all discomfort I had felt that time to me being sleep deprived, and that this time would be different. That there would be a perfectly logical explanation for why the children suddenly became silent. I popped my head out of the window and looked at the daycare below. I was greeted by the same sight as that night 2 months ago. The children were all standing in the yard looking up at the sky. Again, I too looked up, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. It was a clear blue sky without a cloud in sight. There wasn't even a sign of an airplane moving across it. Perplexed that this kind of thing had happened twice now, I shouted my question at them. What were they doing? But none of them answered me. They didn't even acknowledge me. It was creepy, and I decided to not get involved. I closed my window and pretended that nothing was wrong. At least, I tried to pretend nothing was wrong. Every time the children grew silent, I closed the blinds and put on the radio. If the radio was already on, I turned up the volume, even if I couldn't stand the song that was playing. Any distraction was better than being reminded of the silent stares of the children. Now, I know a simple distraction for your mind rarely is enough to ignore a larger issue, but what caused me to get involved in this was not because my distraction was failing. It was because the silence was irregular. There wasn't any particular schedule I could follow to avoid the silence. I tried to stay vigilant, always ready with something that could fill the silence whenever it appeared. But constantly being on edge makes you tired. Eventually, you lower your defenses, and the danger drags you into its nest. I too suffered this fate. The day the silence got hold of me was a Thursday. It was in the afternoon when I was getting back home from work. Right as I was passing by the daycare, the sound of the children stopped. This was the first time I heard this unnatural silence when I was outside. Somehow, I had been lucky that it only had happened when I was in my apartment. When it happened right next to me, I couldn't help myself but to take a closer look. Like usual, all the children in the yard were standing still, staring up at the sky. I looked up too, but the only thing I saw was a cloudy sky. I wondered if maybe the angle was wrong. Maybe if I looked from where they were standing, I would see it. I threw glances around me. There were no one else along the street, and everyone in the daycare was focused on the sky. I took a deep breath and entered the daycare's grounds. All the children were immobile and staring at the sky. I imitated them and raised my head. It was an eye. There was a scar in the sky, like someone had ripped apart a piece of fabric, and in that large tear was a big eye. It must have at least been the size of a fully grown human, and it glowed yellow. How hadn't I seen it from my window? Was it only visible from this yard? It was watching us, silently observing. I couldn't move, or I didn't dare to. I was exposed, at the mercy of the being that I belonged to. The pressure the eye exuded was enough for me to empty my bladder. As the wet sensation trickled down my legs, I still didn't look away from the eye. Then, it blinked and closed the rift. Everything resumed to a state of normalcy, with the children playing and laughing. I should have left the daycare grounds, but I was still frozen in shock of what I had seen. I didn't walk away from there until one of the teachers from the daycare walked up to me and grabbed me by the arm, wondering who I was and why I was there. I was too stunned to explain properly, but she must have seen the spots on my pants and understood the situation. She let me off with a warning, after making sure I hadn't entered to harm the children, but rather had been driven by the inherent curiosity of the unknown. Though she let me know if they ever saw me on the grounds again, they would send me to the police. When I left, she told me to forget what I had seen for my own sanity's sake. I agree. That probably would be for the best. But how would I be able to? How could you forget something like that? No. Even though I want to, I can't forget about that eye. Now, every time I no longer can hear the children, I'm reminded of that watching and observing eye. The being staring down at us like a biologist studying bacteria. And I can't help but wonder, how long is it going to be satisfied by only looking?